Welcome reporters, members of the community, and everyone else to this meeting in wonderful Washington County, Ohio on this beautiful July day. My name is Bev Reed, and I'm the Appalachian, Ohio organizer for Buckeye Environmental Network, or BEN for short. We are a statewide environmental advocacy nonprofit. Originally from Belmont County, I am familiar with the tremendous amount of infrastructure required and the waste stream resulting from the oil and gas industry. My predecessors at BEN have been working on injection wells since about 2011. I've been working on this issue since about 2024. So the reason why people are so focused on Washington County right now is because it receives the most amount of brine waste into Class 2 injection wells out of all 88 counties in the state. And according to the ODNR, or the Ohio Department of Natural Resources records, about half of that waste stream comes from out of state. Ohio has become the dumping ground for this toxic radioactive waste stream. The MARIETTA and Warren Township areas are particularly vulnerable due to the close proximity from the injection wells to the drinking water aquifers for thousands of people. So over the past year and a half, we've had specialists in town to speak on these issues. We've worked with others in the community from Washington County for Safe Drinking Water, a grassroots group that has formed through this initiative. We worked with them to get hundreds of people to meetings over the past year and a half. We've filed lawsuits against the ODNR for using outdated rules and regulations for permitting injection wells. We've helped 8 local governing bodies pass resolutions seeking a moratorium on injection wells due to the myriad of issues and concerns in the county. But today, we're here to focus on the oil and gas production well owners and their lived experiences, dealing with these increasing problems in their wells. I will give some background context to the reason we're here today, and then my colleague Roxanne Groff, who has been working on injection wells the longest in the state, will introduce some of the producers we have in the room and allow them to tell their stories. We will then have a few elected officials in the room speak to their efforts in protecting the people they represent. We will leave time for refreshments provided by Roxanne after the press conference. I hope to keep this about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. If we go over that, please forgive me, but we'll try to keep a tight schedule today. And then we'll leave time for refreshments and any interviews that we want to do inside after that. And then we'll leave for the field trip. And I'll give logistics on the field trip once all the speakers have spoken. So the sites we're going to head to are just a couple miles from here to visualize the issues happening in the field. So just for a little 101 background for anybody who's unaware, although I know most of you reporters are aware of these technical issues, injection wells are actually just pipes in the ground that accept the waste left over from fracturing operations. There is no well per se, but rather the brine waste fluid is pumped into geological layers thousands of feet deep where it's supposed to be disposed of and never to interact with the surface in any way ever. However, we are seeing that this has not been the case, especially in southeastern Ohio. A conventional well is a vertical pipe that goes into the ground, and most of them were drilled anywhere from 150 years ago to a few decades ago. Hundreds of thousands of these vertical wells dot the state and the nation, drilled before any regulations were in place or any substantial documentation systems were there. The vast majority of which are orphaned and abandoned. Correct me if I'm wrong, producers in the room, but these types of wells are not really being drilled anymore. They have been replaced with horizontal wells that extract much more gas. Class 2 injection wells have been around for decades also. However, since around 2010, when the shale boom started, these injection wells have been pumping considerably more waste into the ground at higher pressure. The ODNR Oil and Gas Division is charged with overseeing all the infrastructure in the state, the conventional wells, the fracking operations, the injection wells. The ODNR Oil and Gas Division oversees all of that. So later this month, Ben, Buckeye Environmental Network, we will be releasing a report in conjunction with Frac Tracker Alliance that exposes the inadequacies of the agency in a way never before documented. The gaps between incidents and resultant violations, inadequate inspector-to-well ratios, and other inadequacies will be explained. In this report, we're going to release later this month or next month. So today we're focused on the Redbird injection well and other injection wells in this region. I have with me copies of a new report that we recently published, Ben recently published on this situation. So please review that entirely upon producing your media stories, as it really encapsulates most of what you will hear today. And I have some physical copies of those. I have them right there. Does anybody know where those went? If any reporter would like a copy of that, please come grab one now, if you haven't yet. I think I emailed that to you all in case you saw that in your email. So elected officials representing this area at the state level are also in the room. We have State Rep Tristan Rader, who will speak in a little bit, and some water authorities as well. So I'm going to let Roxanne introduce the Bobs and the other producers here in a moment, in just a moment. But just a tad bit more background information is, this is from the report. In 2018, Redbird Development LLC obtained a permit from the state of Ohio and began injecting waste into the Redbird number 4 Class 2 disposal well. I brought a map with me. So the Redbird 4 is here along Route 339, and there's 3 injection wells that Redbird Development owns there, and then we have 2 other injection wells in this 4-mile radius here that are also active. And that's kind of all started in the past 10 years or so that they've been injecting waste. About a year into Redbird's operations, nearby owners of conventional oil and gas wells noticed a significant change in the behavior of their wells. They were once normal and productive. They began flooded with unnatural and unending amounts of fluid seemingly overnight. In a matter of weeks, 28 production wells went down and were no longer usable. In 2019, the group of impacted well owners immediately communicated the issues to the ODNR, Oil and Gas Division. Despite these owners' expertise, decades of experience, and ability to detect a problem, ODNR downplayed their concerns, denied there was a problem, and told the owners that injection wells could never migrate brine waste, could never leak out of their intended disposal zone. And after 6 months of the worsening issues, the group finally reached out to their state representative at the time and demanded the attention of ODNR. Well, ODNR finally after that came to town and met with them in person during COVID, and that only then did they take action. And that's a really important part to this story, is how long it actually took. So they did an investigation. They checked the conventional wells around the area, and they found that it was in fact foreign brine waste showing up in their wells. So the opposite of what the agency was saying actually happened, and they proved that it was happening by hiring a consultant to do the testing of the wells. So Redbird Development LLC, they made modifications to the Redbird number 4 because they traced the brine back to Redbird 4. So the Redbird well was voluntarily sealed off of the Ohio Shale geologic formation, and I have it back here where you can see where they were injecting into, and then they cemented that off and drilled deeper. ODNR was hoping that would fix the problem. Well, the damage was already done. The wells were already full of brine. There was no way to get the brine off unless they just let it flow. ODNR told the owners to capture the brine, dispose of it, and that would fix the problem. Well, who can afford that? Who's going to do that? Who's going to spend their money doing that? And it's just not right that that was ODNR's solution. They didn't offer to actually dispose of the brine for these well owners. So fast forward to present day, the pressures continue to climb. That's why we're here today. That's the whole point of being here today, is the pressures are increasing. And we have this chart that demonstrates this. In 2020, when the injection well was drilled deeper, the Redbird number 4 was drilled deeper, was here. And you can see the pressures in the wells, which not all the wells that were impacted are on this chart, but there are a few. And then fast forward to 2023, you can see the pressures increasing. And here in 26, this is where we are now, how much they've gone up. This is when they drill deeper. It shouldn't be going upwards like that. So the G Curry number 3 is the closest well to Redbird. It's 1.6 miles from Redbird there, and that's Bob Wilson's well. That has the most significant pressure in it. So the casing pressure went from 50 psi in September 23 to 218 in 2025 to 340 in June 26. Bob tells us that that pressure should be about 10 to 20, I believe. It shouldn't be in the 300s. And then the next one, farthest out, is the Glen Nichols, and that pressure went from 55 psi to 240 psi in a matter of 6 years. And the Irving Reynolds 2 went from 0 psi in 2023 to 185 in 2026. So that's the gist of the report. And we have been contacting ODNR weekly to ask about the situation. You know, we do our due diligence. We don't just try to stir things up in the community. We really try to get to the bottom of the answers and you know, make sure we're sharing appropriate information. You know, we don't want to share false information. So ODNR, the problem with them though is they don't call you back. They don't call you, they don't email you back. They don't, you're lucky if they pick up the phone when you do call. And that's where I will pass it to Roxanne. I think she's going to give a little more context to this, and she will introduce the producers now to tell their stories. But I hope that background was helpful. And Roxanne, would you like to?
Thanks, Bev. So I'm Roxanne Groff. I live in Athens County in Bern Township. And I'm also an advisory board member of Buckeye Environmental Network, with whom I've worked for on and off over the last 30 years. And today I'm wearing my favorite t-shirt. It's from Torch Can Do, which was one of the community groups that I worked with for several years as they organized and protested against the K&H injection wells in their community. Also, we organized against the Reliable Resources well in Rauch Township, which was only just a few miles from the K&H wells. Well, this is a situation, I'm doing the little back history because it's no surprise to anybody from Athens County or anybody who works with Ben that what ODNR said in the very beginning in 2011 when the very first injection well permit application showed up for Athens County is can't happen. Migration of brine cannot happen. Never mentioned toxic radioactive waste either. Can't happen, won't happen. Not a chance. That cap rock, the geological formations are safe, they're porous. Somebody's going to tell us why they're not in a little bit. And so we knew that it could happen. We had geologists tell us it can happen. Not likely, but can. Well, it was just a few years later, in 2019, that I met Bob Lane. Bob Lane was the owner of the wells, along with Bob Wilson, whose wells were damaged, demolished, assaulted by the toxic radioactive waste. Unprecedented migration of brine, according to ODNR. Unprecedented migration of brine happened to their wells. And so I met Bob Lane, and a year later, that was in 2020, in 2021, I was down at Vito Lake, where the second blowout of wells happened in an abandoned well in Vito Lake, in the spring that feeds Vito Lake. And I was down checking out the work that was being done down there, and I met Bob Wilson, and he introduced himself. He said, "I'm Bob Wilson," and I said, "Bob Wilson, you're Bob Lane's partner." He said, "Yes, I am." I said, "Bob and Bob." I said, "Well, that's not going to work. I can't call you Mr. Wilson and Mr. Lane, so I'm just going to call you the Bobs." So they became the Bobs. We went from Vito Lake. It wasn't but a couple years later that we found out that the K&H wells and the Reliable Resources well in Athens County also had unprecedented migration of brine, only preceded by the unprecedented migration of brine in Washington County at the Redbird well number 4. Then I met Bobby Anderson. I met Bobby Anderson in 2025 when Washington County was assaulted by more injection well applications. American Growers number 1, and American Growers number 4 kind of went under the radar. Nobody knew it was happening. A few of us with Buckeye Environmental Network wrote comments. And then the city of Marietta got involved. And Susan Vessels, the illustrious Marietta City Council president, with the help of all of the incredible community members who woke up to the fact that this unprecedented migration of brine was very close to their water, their drinking water sources. And alarm bells went off, folks organized, just like in Athens County, where it wasn't supposed to happen and did. We became friends with some of the producers, and since we met the Bobs and their friends, we have learned more about the geology and the lack of knowledge at ODNR's level of oversight and management of these wells to know that what we said back in 2011 was not only true, ODNR knew it was true, and yet simply just let these wells be permitted in geological zones that were not capable of containing toxic radioactive waste brine from oil and gas extraction. So I am so proud of this community, and I'm so proud of the Bobs, especially because they have stuck with they've stuck with their determination that they have been kicked aside and abused by the state agency and our lawmakers. One of them excused from that, Tristan, and his buddy Representative Brennan, that they have stayed with this idea, with the knowledge that they have been abused by the state of Ohio and our lawmakers who refuse to look at the facts of what is happening with the oil and gas industry in the state of Ohio. So when you have producers and environmental advocates and community members all working together, you can't help but notice that, you know, there is a serious problem in the state of Ohio. And we hope that the stories that keep being generated from all of the information that we have from the producers themselves, I think they are the most important key in, you know, what's happening in Ohio. We can say, hey, we know this because we've got records and we've got public, and we've got inspection reports, and we can say what's happening. These gentlemen have been kicked to the sides. The backbone of the oil and gas industry has been said, you've been doing it long enough, step aside, the big boys are taking over. So I don't know which one of the tri-Bobs wants to speak first. I don't know, Bob Lane, Bob Wilson, maybe Bob Wilson, you'd like to come up, and their story is heartbreaking. After all these years, you know, since 2019, their businesses have suffered terribly, and the state of Ohio absolutely refuses to pay attention to them. So, my buddy Bob.
My name's Bob Wilson, and I own an oil and gas company called Wilson Energy. I own roughly 170 oil and gas wells. 50 of those now currently don't make anything but disposal water. And my problem started in 2019 when the Redbird 4 was in production. And to give you a little background, I didn't drill most of my wells, I bought them. and most of them were run down. I spent lots of money fixing them up, and I was just about through the whole field in 2019. And I noticed the gas falling off on a lot of wells, and of course we took the rig back out and started working on them. They was full of water. So we started putting packers in the wells and putting pump jacks on and doing, a lot of wells I spent $30,000 to $40,000 on, and didn't help a bit. It just, water just kept coming. And I was losing 3 or 4 wells a week, so I called the ODNR and I told them that I believed that injection water was infiltrating my wells. And they were pretty blunt with me. They said, that's not possible, can't happen, click. They didn't want to talk about it. So the next week, I'd lose 3 or 4 more wells, I'd call them again. Same answer. So ended up, I had 25 or 30 wells down, and like I said, I'm throwing money at these things, and I'm not having any luck at all. And like Bev said, we finally, in the middle of COVID, we finally got a meeting with Eric Vendel and Mary Mertz, and they started sending people out to test the water in our wells. And 6 months later, even though it's not possible that the water infiltrated my wells, guess what? It was disposal water. They admitted it. Nobody ever told me they were sorry. They've never paid me for any damages. It's business as usual for all. They keep permitting more wells. And like I said, it's still happening. I've lost 2 wells in the last 5, 6 weeks. I've got 25, 30 landowners that's had free gas since the 60s, that no longer have free gas, no longer get a royalty check. And again, it's just business as usual. And just so you know, I'm not anti-oil and gas. I've been working in the oil and gas industry for 51 years. That's what my business is. That's all I've ever done. I'm not trying to shut the oil and gas industry down. However, I think the horizontal drillers ought to be made responsible for their own waste. They're billion-dollar corporations, let them figure out something else to do with it. I've had people tell me that you can't take radioactivity out of the water, but if they don't try, how are you gonna know? They're just taking the cheap route out by dumping this water on us. And you know, my wells can't be repaired. The damage they've done to Washington County can't be repaired. And I told the inspector the other day, I said, you know, you could shut every injection well in Washington County down today. My business is still ruined. I get up and go to work every day and lose money. You know, I enjoy what I'm doing, but you ask yourself, whatever profession you're in, if you'd get up every day and burn $500 before you went to work, would you enjoy your job? That's where I'm at. And it's not going to get any better. I mean, something happened. Like I said, my business is ruined. And again, nobody told me they're sorry. I haven't got any paid for any damages. Bob Lane and I have had a lawsuit ongoing for 6 years now. Of course, the state also runs the courts, and that keeps getting kicked to the side. So whether we ever see a courtroom or not, it's something else. But I don't want to take up all the time here speaking, but I've been living in hell for 7 years, and somebody owes me an accounting of it, I can tell you that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. We're going to have a Q&A after everyone speaks, so we'll have a couple other producers speak next, and then we'll have Dr. Jeffrey from Marietta College, a geologist, to explain the threats to the drinking water and kind of how this brine is actually migrating, to give even more context here. And also, Mr. Wilson brought a couple of jugs of brine that he took from his wells, so if you want to get any pictures of any of that, feel free to do that as well after we're done. So, Mr. Anderson, would you like to speak next, and then maybe Mr. Lane after that? Okay.
I would like to teach you, if I can, ferocity. I guess I was a bad boy. I perforated a well that caused all the problems in the very beginning. down here on Leonard Christie's land. There's a zone called, yes, yes. I'd like to pass this around if you can. This is actually Maxburg sand. Maxburg. You've heard tell the city up of Maxburg? Okay? This is Maxburg sand, right down here at Mount Run. I drilled the well years ago. Didn't produce the Maxburg, went on to the Brea and the Gordon. They played out, so-called, and I decided I would perforate the pipe, come up and run concrete through the perforations and frack the Maxburg. However, everybody around thought they was going to get $4,500 for the deep rights. Okay, and the landowner wanted his well back. And I said, it's yours. Now I'll show you what happened if I can. Maybe you can pass this around. This is actually, you probably never ever will see this again. This is actually Maxburg sandstone that covers, well, some of us right very close to us. Beautiful sand, beautiful sandstone. Okay, this was the well that caused the very first problem down here at Mount Run. They killed all the hillside off. I drilled the well down to 2280, down to the top of the shale. The Maxburg sandstone is up here. Just lay it over here, can't see it. Okay, so I cut a hole in the pipe right in here to squeeze concrete through and push concrete up through. But I lost the well, you see, back to the landowner because he wanted the $4,500 an acre. And it was fine with me. He took it. I didn't need it anyhow. So what had happened, the state was, the injection well is over here. That water, I feel, came up, okay? Came through the hole, it came up to the Maxburg sand, which is 17% porosity. 17% porosity. That sand you got around, little hole, air holes in it, or whatever you want to call them, pores, 17% holes in it. Now, then, it can, for the city boys, for their water, drinking water, there's Maxburg wells, unbelievable. There are 50 right there in Marietta area. There's 1,400 piles of fly ash down there that Bill Tracer used to pump at Elkin. Anyhow, they pulled the pipe out of those old wells so the make tanks and everything during the World War II and World War I wars. They made the steel. They pulled the pipe out, and that let this water then come up through here. And now I think eventually it will get to the city of Marietta's water wells. Now it may take a few years. Is there any city officials here?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know how long it will take, but I do know it will take water. The Maxburg sand will take water. To prove my point, I'll have you so you will know. There's no need to wait. Take an eyedropper and put, okay, drop of water on it, okay, and then keep putting water on it as soon as it dissolves. It goes into the rock, okay? Eventually, that water will come on that napkin. I showed her how porosity actually will work. It goes through that rock. It goes through it. It drinks it. Now, close to us right here, Warren Grade School is right close to us. And this is an example of the sand from those type of wells. This is what built the city of Marietta. Gravel in the Cow Run sand. 1,200 barrels right across from the grade school on that hillside. In my lifetime, Dad showed it to me. The old shanty's gone now. That will actually be 1,200 barrels. They dammed up the creek down there on Wets and brought the trains out to show people from Oklahoma. And they say that's what built part of Marietta, especially Citizens Bank. Okay, is the water going into the zone?
Completely porous, going right through.
It went right through. Now you can see why I think someday your city may be in trouble. If water goes through rock. I'll pass this around too. That's Cow Run. Okay, I guess that's Bob Lane talk, Heath.
How deep's the Cow Run here, Bobby?
What's that?
How deep's the Cow Run here, 400 or 500?
No, it's closer to 650.
Bobby, what's the name of this well?
What-
Your well that you were just describing here?
Chrismore one.
Chrismar, right.
So, just a little more context. The Ohio Shale Zone was drilled into for the American Growers 1 injection well by Deep Rock. And that is within 2 miles of Marietta's source water protection area. So that's what he's referring to when he said that injection well was drilled into the shale. And it already migrated up to the Berea zone and got into some production wells in that zone too. And I think it was, what year was that, Roxanne, that it got into those wells, like
19, when they
2019.
started injecting.
2020?
Same time the Redbird was,
Yeah, same, so they permitted the Redbird into the Ohio Shale Formation, the American Growers 1, and a couple other wells, and they should have never done that. That shouldn't have happened. So it got into the Berea. We had another production well owner that wasn't able to be with us, Jack Chamberlain, but he shared his story in the past. He's had wells that have flooded with brine as well. There's also a video of him opening the valve and demonstrating the brine under pressure. So that's, perhaps even more concerning than what's going on out here is what's happening in Marietta, just because of the sheer number of people that get their drinking water from there. So, but it's all an issue, obviously. So, Mr. Lane, would you like to say a few words? Oh, do you have something else?
No, I
Yeah, go ahead.
actually believe this may take a few years before you lose your water wells. Okay? It's going to happen because the water's already in place to come to your way. I would like to see the injection company instantly put a bond made out to the city of Marietta, like for 18 million or 20 million. Because what are you going to do 10 years from now when you have no drinking water? You're going to have to spend a bunch of money. The city will. It'll break your city probably. It may be 40 million, but make them get a bond paid in advance for so many years to cover you. I mean, they bring railroad cars in there and dumping the water now, but, I'm just one man. I'm a small guy. Thank you.
Thank you.
The water go through the rock?
Yes, it goes through rapidly, absolutely.
They went right through, got the napkin wet. Okay.
who, you said Chrismar, who was that?
Leonard Christie's,
Leonard Chrismar.
yeah. Leonard was gone at that time. Leonard really treated me nice. I drove a lot of wells with Leonard property. But his son-in-law wanted the lease back, and you know who they are. So. big money people. Yeah.
What
Go ahead.
what formation did you say that sand is from there again, Bob?
Matchburg.
Matchburg.
Yeah, yeah.
You can correct me if I'm wrong. I wasn't gonna say anything because Bob and him covered a lot of bases, but, my good friend, Mark Fulton, who owns Ramp Company down here on 550 outside of Marietta, even though he builds fishing tolls and drilling tolls for the oil and gas industry, he bought land outside of Marietta down there, and there was a Berea oil and gas well on it. He bought the well as well. He used the well to heat his business and his offices and everything for several years there. And he called me one day up at my welding business and said, Bob, could you come down here? And I said, what's the matter, Mark? I could tell he was kind of excited about something. He said, my well, it's got oil all around it, clear around it, about a 15-foot diameter. And he said, it's coming up around the well, the pipe. And he said, I said, you sure about that? And he said, yeah. I said, you sure it isn't your stuffing box leaking? That's like a seal on top of your well where your pump jack runs up and down and pumps oil out. He said, no, it's coming out of the ground. And I said, yeah, I'll be down. It only took me about 10 minutes to drive down there. And there was a well 3 times as big as one of those tables clear around that well. And there was gas bubbling up out around the pipe and oil coming with it. And I told him, I said, Mark, you got somebody can run in the, well, the quickest thing into town to a agriculture store and get several bales of straw and go out to Miller's Supply and get some pads, absorbent pads. I said, you're gonna need them. And I said, well, circle that and put pads underneath the straw bales because I said it's going to be in your parking lot here. It was right below his well. And I said it's going to go across the road and be in that grip on 550. I said if it keeps this up. And he said, well, what do we got to do to stop it? I said it ain't going to be done quick because you'd have to pull everything out of the well and put a plug in it or something to stop it. And which would take a lot of time. And the well would be across the 550 highway by then, by the time you got something like that done. And he said, well, what are we going to do about it, Bob? And I said, well, maybe we better call state inspector if you don't care and get somebody down here to show them what's going on. I said, they aren't going to believe what we tell them. So we did that, and pretty soon a state inspector showed up, very young fellow, very young. And he went out there and looked at the well, and we were all there. And he said, well, you got a casing leak. And this well normally carries 60 to 100 pound pressure. He held it back to heat all his buildings with and everything. And it was down to 15 pounds on the casing. And I looked at it and I said, is that gauge working right, Mark? And he said, yeah. He said, it's been on there for quite a while and it's what it reads. And I said, you care if I blow the well down? He said, no, Bob, do whatever you have to. So I blew, he said we had a casing leak, and that means that the gas pressure was forcing the oil up around the pipe on the ground there. And I knew that wasn't so, but anyway, we blowed all the pressure off the well, had 0 pressure on it. The well, oil and gas kept coming. And we stood there for quite a while and kept coming. And I said, you still think you got a casing leak? He said, no. He said, it doesn't make sense. He said, no pressure on the well. What would be forcing that gas and oil up out of there? And I said, I don't know about any wells real close around here. But he had talked to Bob sometime or other, and you had told him about shallow wells that was drilled right up above there. And maybe in this sand that you're talking about. And this all fits together. And we stood there for a little while longer, and they was putting those bales of straw around there and those pads trying to catch that. And I looked at that state oil and gas inspector and I said, you aren't going to believe this, and you go back to Columbus and they aren't going to believe it. Well, I said, this stuff's coming from that disposal well. And some of you who live around here know how far it is from Chilean sands down there where the disposal well is out the ramp business there, and like a crow flies, it ain't that far. What would it be, Bob? You have an idea? 2 or 3 miles?
I'd say probably half to 4 miles.
Oh, would things be that close?
Pretty close.
Yeah, anyway, I said it's coming from that disposal well. He looked at me like I was crazy. And we stood there and talked about it for a little bit. Pretty soon I heard something go like that. Kind of a sucking sound. I looked down and here was the oil around there real close going back down in the ground. And the gas had stopped coming. And that inspector looked at it and he said, boy, I wonder what happened. And I said, you might not want to know. And this fits together with what Bob was telling about that sand there. I said it found an easier place to go to migrate to. I said, who knows what that is? It might be somebody's water well close by here, or anything could do that. I said, I hate to think of this or even say it, but I said I wouldn't care if it came up in the middle of the Ohio River. Maybe somebody would get their head out of the sand to do something about it. And for all I know, it might be going there. I don't know. But anyhow, it found an easier avenue to get through. But everything Bob said about this sand, it's just realistic. It's going to take the path of least resistance. And once it gets up high enough, and you've got wells down there with what, 300-400 pound pressure on them, water pressure at the surface, that's a lot of downhole pressure to shove water that high in a well, a column of water. And what's going to stop it from getting in wells that are drilled and covered up in Marietta by sidewalks and buildings and everything else that was never plugged right? And we got this well right here, Pinehurst, doing that. It's enough to scare anybody that knows anything about the oil and gas business to death as far as your drinking water is concerned. And that's what concerns me more than anything else. I got 2 great-grandchildren now, under the age of 3 years old, and every time I look in their face, I think of this. What are we leaving you? Not only this problem, but a lot of other problems we realize our country has today. And anyone who couldn't get concerned about this doesn't seem civil to me. But, that's what we got. I've been through this with Bob down there with the state, the chief of division of oil and gas with the state. And I left there thinking there's no man could be that dumb and have a position like that. Writing this stuff off, it's terrible. And I'm sorry, but that's where it's at. I had a birthday with someone else here recently. Turned 81 years old today, and I've seen some water go over the dam. But I'm wondering about people and government today that would sit by and let something like this happen. And that's my biggest concern. I love the oil and gas industry. I've drilled probably upwards of 75 wells. And the difference between me and these people is I did it with my own money. And they get money from Wall Street and everywhere else that they care less about paying it back. And they can walk away from these problems, and like he said, to clean this water up is terribly expensive if possible. We had people check the radiation level in this water. And a fellow drove all the way up here from Albuquerque, New Mexico, a hydrologist, a world-renowned hydrologist. He took a sample out of our wells. My pumper Dale went with him to get the water out of there. He made him put rubber gloves on. Dale said he's an older fellow. He drove all the way up here from Albuquerque in an SUV and had all kind of water equipment in the back of his car. And Dale pulled a sample out for him and he set it down. They put a radiation detector in front of it, and the thing started to chatter. And he looked down at it and he said, "My Lord, who's running this state?" First thing out of his mouth. He said the radiation level in that water is 3 times higher than you're allowed to transport on any highway in the United States of America. He said, "Do they have radiation placards on these trucks?" And Dale told him what everybody in the oil and gas business knows. No, there's no radiation placards on them. And they're hauling this water. He said, "Are these men suited up? Because if they get this on them, they're going to die of bone cancer. And enough of it on them that's hauling it." And then we found out that one of our good politicians got a bill through Congress where any pollutants and any byproducts in the oil and gas industry doesn't have to be reported or recorded or known about. But we've got some issues. We've got some issues. Thank you.
Bob, and happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
So, is there any other producers in the room that would like to say just a few words? Mr. Hoon, would you like to say anything?
If I can, just from right
Yeah.
here. Tomorrow, I'm meeting the well inspector. We have wells down Athens County. By the way the crow flies where the tall grass disposal well were, over dead is about 3/4 of a mile. Well, when they plugged the tall grass, they pumped the guy from the state didn't know what he was doing, trying to get circulation to cement. Well, he couldn't get circulation. He just had brine trucks come in. Anyhow, they pumped like 40 truckloads of the brine into the ground. Well, it migrated over towards our wells and it flooded 5 of our good wells. And I mean, they were good gas wells. Anyhow, they were dead up until about a month and a half ago. The well that's closest, the Philip Thomas well, has now got 25 pounds of water pressure on it. Mysteriously, it's migrating south now. So I don't know whether it's come from Arrowhead, Redbird. By the way the crow flies from the Arrowhead disposal well to the Philip Thomas #1 is about 3.5 miles. But we've had the water travel from Redbird out to almost to Route 7, which is 5 miles. So, yeah. But the well inspectors in this area are well aware of the problems. So.
Yeah, thank you. And then we have a Warren Water Board member. Would you like to come up and say a few words? Didn't you lose your gas in the winter?
Pardon?
Didn't you lose your gas in the winter?
My mother's well flooded out. Yeah, it was one of the first ones. I believe it came from the flowers.
Well, it was before Redbird was drilled, so it either come from tall grass or flowers.
Flowers. Yeah.
Her well was flooded out on her property.
Yes,
She lost her gas in the winter.
yes, and the well down on the, what's that plant, used to be the Gessa. They lost one of their wells too, at least one of them at the same time.
Well, there you have it. We have lots of people with the same story over and over again in southeast Ohio. And what are we doing about it? Dr. Jeffrey, would you like to say a few words?
Sure.
He's a geologist.
Business that's running down here with the injection wells, I couldn't imagine anything that is more of clearly a failed business concept. The intention of this business is to pump the fluids down into a formation and they're supposed to stay there forever. Now, the problem with these formations in southern Ohio is that they have very low porosity and permeability, especially these deep formations that are down below. This is the, on this diagram, part of the Big Lime. And let's see, on this one is called the Bass Island, and drillers have different terms from the technical terms that we might use in the sciences and all, but for the most part, just because it's called a dolostone or a dolomite or a sandstone does not mean that it has porosity and permeability. Petroleum geologists spend a lot of time and money trying to find the little patches here and there, even in something that is a pure sandstone that might have some porosity and permeability and has the right conditions for some sort of accumulation. So usually the layers that we do have are compartmentalized too, so even if you do find a porous area, it probably doesn't go on forever. So these are not blanket sands and limestones that have porosity and permeability that go on in all directions. But it's clear pretty much what's going on here, and the evidence is basically right here. This does not happen in your normal oil and gas well. You don't have inclines like that. You have a decline. Oil and gas wells basically lose pressure over time. So there's something unnatural going on there. So knowing this area, and I've been down in like the Burning Springs mine, I've seen the subsurface fractures and faults that are in this area, and they are lots of fractures and faults. They have been induced by orogenies over the last 300, 400, 500 million years. In fact, these layers down here have experienced several big mountain building events, and the last big one was the one that made the Appalachian Mountains. So we know these fractures go down, and all of these layers are very impermeable, and we should not have fluids flowing up through them, but we do. And what's probably going on, what is going on is clearly with this data that is indicating that this is happening, is that the fluids are finding a way. So what happens is you have all of these fractures. They usually occur in sets. So on this diagram I have them in green. So you can see there are patterns here, and some fracture sets are going one way, some fracture sets are going in the other way, in another way. And usually the area has sort of a stress on it. And we have a stress on our area, and the drillers are probably familiar with that, with what they call borehole breakout. But anyways, what happens is some of the fractures are pushed closed by that stress, and some of the fractures are held open. So regardless, some of the fractures are permitting the fluids to be traveling upwards. Now, fluids in the subsurface flow in the direction of low pressure. So they're putting tremendous amounts of pressure into this area. The problem is that there's no room for the fluids down in that layer. There's not enough porosity. There's not enough permeability. The layer already has fluids in it. These layers have not been produced and depleted like the Berea Formation is, which is the main layer that people are getting oil and gas out of around here. So because there's basically no room, you know, water and fluids, the salt waters that are, we call them connate waters, that are the fluids that are naturally within the formations, they're everywhere. They're down there. They're already under the pressures that are the formation pressures deep underground. So they're not compressible. So when there are areas down there that are basically limited areas, and you're trying to push more fluids into an area that is already under high pressure, and already has fluids, non-compressible fluids in it, they're going to try to find, like we just heard, the easiest way out. So the easiest way out is fractures. So those fractures, and it looks like we've got fractures that are pretty much going all the way down and all the way up. They're probably not going very far from the injection wells. And if you're trying to understand this, yes, the goal is to have all of the fluids remain down here and not go anywhere else. They're toxic, they're radioactive. We do not want them anywhere near the surface. When we dispose of radioactive material from like a nuclear power plant, we bury them deep underground. There's this site in New Mexico where they have an old salt mine that they take it very far down underground, and it's never supposed to see the surface again. But this stuff is coming up these fractures because that's the easiest way out. They have, it's kind of like a magnet. This Berea Formation, which is higher and is under very low pressure because all of these producing wells have been basically sucking on it, pulling the fluids out, lowering the pressure. So that fluid is flowing from the high pressure area up these fractures into the low pressure area. When they get up into the Berea Formation, they will invade it, and then all of these wells are basically acting like suction. They are acting like magnets. The water will flow up to them and make a beeline to the first place that has the lowest pressure. So a well floods out, they shut that well in, it goes to the next one. So little by little, the water is going to be coming up these fractures and spreading out along the Berea Formation as quickly as they can pump that stuff in, ruining everybody's wells. Some of the fractures come up to the surface. If you've ever been out to rinky-dinks, there are a couple of nice outcrops that have very nice big fracture sets that you can see some of these fractures. Too bad we didn't plan on that for the future. We could have gone up and seen some of that. But, so the fluids can flow up the fractures and up the well bores, and don't forget we have potentially thousands of orphaned wells in this area, and with that increasing pressure, here's the evidence. I did call up the head of the ODNR and say, wait a minute, we've got a problem down here, and he said, well, we need evidence. This is it. This is This is the evidence, that's the evidence. And, yeah, you're right, they should be down here, and the government should be immediately shutting this down. Now, Marietta's aquifer is in gravels at the bottom of the Muskingum River Valley. They were deposited there during the last glacial ice age as the glaciers melted and we had all this gravel. Now, you could imagine how many gallons of water do we pull out of the Marietta aquifer. This isn't just Marietta. Take a big circle around this area. Beverly, Devola, Marietta, Williamstown, Boaz, Vienna, Parkersburg, Belgrade. So all of these communities, what is that, 100,000 people, 200,000 people, depend on these types of aquifers, and they are connected via orphaned wells, via producing wells like we've been hearing about, and by fractures to the Berea. So we have a serious environmental problem here, and it's clear that it's expanding as we're speaking here. So what I would say is that yes, this is a failed business concept. There aren't fluids going into these layers down here, or at least a lot of them are escaping up these fractures, spreading through the Berea Formation, and it's continuing to flow outward and up to the surface through fractures, orphaned wells and producing wells, and then whether it's the Ohio River or the Muskingum River or even the Little Hocking, those aquifers are where we get our water. And if you're talking about jobs, of course we like to promote jobs, but if you keep doing this, we're going to promote a lot more jobs because you're going to have hundreds of geotechnical people and engineers come in and put interceptor wells in and track down every little ounce of that radioactive fluid, and it's going to be very expensive. That's going to cost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars to try to make sure that those fluids do not reach our aquifers or the surface. I mean, with these types of pressures, you have to sink wells in there just to draw the pressure back down so that you can trap those fluids in place in the subsurface. That would be the solution. And then you have to bar it off. Have you guys ever heard of a place called Love Canal? This is a slightly different situation. But this is a whole region here that's the fracture system in the Berea is going to be basically toxic. I don't know what more you can say about that. This is a terrible problem.
Sir, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
Are you familiar with the Parkersburg Range thin line, the natural crack?
I do not. I know that the Burning Springs
Yeah.
is the biggest one,
Right.
and that there are a number of more. These are deep-seated thrust faults.
How deep do they go? Parkersburg Range? Like,
Well, I mean, I don't know what they're towed out in, but where they're coming up, certainly for the Burning Springs anticline, it's probably some Cambrian shale or something that is towing out in, and then they're coming up making that. And there's probably a whole series of structures that are probably parallel to the Burning Springs anticline that just don't show up on the surface because there just wasn't enough power. But that's causing some of the fracture sets. So you got these north-south trending things. The fracture sets usually occur like this, 90 and 60 degrees on the tops of them. And that's going to be your fluid flow. So there's going to be several sets of fractures. And again, like I said, there were several orogenies that affected these rocks. So they're very complicated in the fractures. And the stress that's coming in today is holding some of those fractures open. So there's ample opportunity. I would have, like I've told all you guys that I've spoken to before, I am a proponent of injection of waste fluids into wells where you can actually prove that there's space, that there's porosity and permeability, and it's been depleted in pressure, and that's the right place to do it. Here, where there is no porosity and permeability in southeast Ohio, and where there is already fluid in the pore spaces, and there's no more room for that stuff, this is the wrong place. They should go find an abandoned oil and gas field that's already been produced, tell us how much space there would be in the subsurface, and that's how much stuff you can put down there. Here they're just injecting infinity. They just think that they can inject an infinite amount of fluids. Where does it end? And it's clearly not working from your guys' data.
Could you repeat your name one more time for viewers in the live stream?
What's that?
Could you repeat your name one more time?
Oh, my name is David Jeffrey,
Thank you.
Jefffery. I always have to get my kids to tell people to spell their names right.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. If we know anything about the way corporate people work, it's all about convenience, maximizing profit. That's why they want to put 7 injection wells around Marietta. They already have 4. They want 3 more. 2 class 2 wells and a class 1 well. Class 1 well is a whole nother story that is very concerning as well. But we are tracking that one. It hasn't really moved yet. They're still in the permitting process for that. But you know, I'd like to dispel myths. There's a lot of myths going around that it is perfectly fine and safe to put all these injection wells around our drinking water sources. So I'm glad we have specialists in the room that can give us the facts and put these rumors to bed. So a couple more speakers and then we'll wrap it up. Are there any water authorities in the room that would like to speak at this time? Mr. Rauch, come on up. He is the water board member of Little Hocking, the previous president of Little Hocking Water Board, and he's also running for county commissioner in Washington County, but he just wanted to speak about his concerns to Little Hocking's aquifer, so go ahead.
Hi there, as Bev mentioned, my name's John Rauch, and I've had the opportunity to be president of Little Hocking Water Association for the past 3 years, and before that, I worked in Ohio and several states with rural communities on their water systems and tried to improve their technical managerial and financial capacity. And every time I come to one of these meetings like this, I get more scared than I was before I came. But it's very alarming. Little Hocking is down near Arrowhead injection wells, and just out the road from the Arrowhead injection wells is Redbird. And the Arrowhead injection wells are actually within a half a mile of our wells. Now, I live 3 miles out in Decatur Township, and I had a gas well that was drilled back in the 70s. It always kept the house warm. Well, you know what? It don't work anymore. So this alarms me, but from a larger standpoint, and I don't know which Bob said, was talking to Ms. Vessel about the cost of the wells. We have $20 million in a contamination fund. And, you know, we got all excited as we put this investment money in there to protect us from problems like that. And we fought the war with, on C8, if you remember that, 20-some years ago. But the more alarming part, when we talked to our hydrologist, well, let's find another aquifer, and you know, if it's 20 miles away or something like that, right now we think we're in a position to develop a new well field and put in, it ain't there. There's no water in these hills except around the rivers. So the alarming part is, if, where's that picture?
This one?
Yeah, if our wells, your wells, the wells around the county get contaminated, we're gonna have to go a long ways away. And we can't take it from Lake Erie because right now, international law says you can't cross the divide. Thank you. But these are concerns, and you know, I want to thank Buckeye Environmental Network, and all the volunteers for this type of meeting, because we've got to get the word out. This is going to cause us a problem down the road. My kids all moved to Texas. I think we're all going to have to move to Texas, and they ain't got no water either. Pardon my bad grammar here. But it is a concern, and I do get scared when I come to these meetings. And thank you for coming down to this particular meeting too.
Thank you, Mr. Rauch. So the Arrowhead injection well he referenced is less than a mile from Little Hocking's.
About a half mile.
Half mile. And it's overpressurized. ODNR determined that it is being overpressurized as we speak, but they took 3 years for them to determine that. Once again, taking way too long to fix the problem. And every single day they're pressurizing it to a dangerously high level, and it's now being fought in the courts, and the Oil and Gas Commission stayed the order to shut down the well. So it is threatening Little Hocking's water source, and we're watching that situation too, but it's like whack-a-mole. How do you keep track of all this stuff? Okay, our last speaker is Representative Tristan Rader. He represents the Lakewood area. Why do we have a Lakewood representative here? Does anybody want to take a wild guess?
Because we can't get the one through.
Because we met with Kevin Rader, and he did not want to participate. We did give him the invitation to come here today. And this is not a political meeting, but I'm just telling you what happened. And he will not meet with ODNR. We did ask him to meet with ODNR, express these concerns, find solutions. It did not happen, so we asked our dear friend to come and talk and just share whatever you'd like, Representative. Thank you.
Sure. First off, thank you again for having me down. I came down here about a year ago, met with the Bobs, Bob Wayne and Bob Wilson, after they came to one of our committee meetings. I'm on natural resources, I'm also the ranking member on energy. So energy is really my bailiwick, but when the Bobs came down and testified about what was happening down here, I said I had to come see it for myself, and I did. We went to the wells, I saw how overpressured they were. We took a detector to see the radiation of the fluid that was coming out. Clearly, what was coming out of these wells was coming from these injection wells that weren't too far away, shutting down your local wells, right? So from there, I did meet with Vendel and others, and I spent the past year beating down doors downstate, or upstate from here, I guess, to try to figure out what the solutions were, and it's been tough. And at this point, I don't know how else to put it, but either willful ignorance or complete incompetence at the state level. When you're talking about what's going on here, clearly we are at the precipice of an emergency, right? Our economies down here are shutting down. Bob, you're struggling, right, to make it with these wells because of these injection wells. We have water aquifers that are being threatened. As we speak, as we sit here, every time I come and learn more, I get more scared too. This is just, it boggles my mind at how we are not trusting the voices of the people who are experiencing these problems. And it breaks my heart. Unless we get some representation, and I'm not talking about political affiliation, political party, that to me does not matter an iota. What matters is actually people that are going to focus on these issues and fix these problems. Maybe we'll get that. Maybe there's a chance. But I know that it won't happen if we don't keep having these meetings and keep coming together and keep fighting. So I just really came down here to say thank you. And I'm not giving up on this issue. Representative Brennan couldn't be here either. We have a bill to ban brine on roads. We're talking about other legislation we can do to give ODNR more authority. But at the end of the day, it's the governor and it's the state departments that need to actually do their jobs. And they need to regulate these wells. Or at the end of the day, we need to give the authority to the counties. I heard someone's running for county commissioner. God bless you for taking on that responsibility potentially in that role. We need to be giving you the tools to ban these practices, because it's been too long that we've made choices to favor Wall Street, the billionaire class, over our local businesses that have been running and been doing their due diligence and their good job at being good stewards of the things that they've been able to manage here. When we know that these companies coming in are not being good stewards of what they've been given by the state to manage here. So that's really it. I think that'll be all I have to say. If you have any questions for... Yeah, I'm Tristan Rader, Tristan, Rader, Rader. And I represent the 13th district, and that's Lakewood and the west side of Cleveland. I represent 7 miles of lakefront too, so this is really important to me. We're blessed with a lot of water up there, but we know that if we don't protect it and do what's right, that it could be contaminated any day of the week if we abandon our post as regulating these really important natural. So water is our greatest natural resource in the state, whether it be under our feet and our lakes or in our rivers. And if we don't do our jobs at protecting these resources, everybody suffers. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So I told you about an hour and 15 minutes. There we go. You're right on time. So do we want to take a couple questions, Q&A right now for anybody who spoke, any reporters?
I want to say one more thing.
Sure.
I forgot to mention this, but if you will recall, about a year ago, there was a well blowout east of Marietta, and that resulted in some deaths, as far as I recall.
Yeah.
And that was right by where they were injecting a few years before. And those injection wells had been shut down because of, I don't know the whole reasoning behind it, but there were dozens of earthquakes that started happening around there. So injection earthquakes, they shut it down. And when they were going out to P&A some orphaned wells out there, they got them ready to do all their work, and they uncapped the well, and all this gas came out and exploded, caused a terrible disaster there. And they probably didn't expect that. And so part of the reason why that happened was probably because these wells are repressuring the Berea Formation. So the Berea Formation, they didn't expect those higher pressures. And when you read the news and you look at the company's reports about them, they basically blamed the workers for not following standard protocol. They've probably done dozens and dozens or hundreds of these wells, and they just didn't expect that extra pressure, which you're right, they need to take extra precautions right now. So anybody that does do work in that business needs to make sure that they are being careful about that extra pressure now, because we are creating a whole bunch of bombs around here. Yeah. All of these orphaned wells and all of these wells that you guys are operating now have abnormally high pressures in them because of this injection. Yeah. And it's not just the injected fluids that are coming out, it's the gas and the oil that is in front of that, it's forcing a front that's going to be coming up those wells at unexpected pressure. So yeah. Make sure we report to the P&A guys that are doing that good work. They need to be careful.
Roxanne?
Thank you, Dr. Jeffrey. I think it's important to note that of the 17 injection wells that are still on the books as operating in Washington County, 8 of them have had serious problems, including the wells that Dr. Jeffrey just mentioned, where they belong to a company called the Ohio Oil and Gas Gathering Corporation. They caused numerous earthquakes, tremors about in the early 2025. But out of 17 wells, 8 have had serious problems, not just a temporary problem, but serious problems. Several have been shut down. 1 has been ordered suspended, and as Bev mentioned, 3 are waiting to be drilled. So, this is the biggest problem that we have with ODNR, is not following up on violations, not enforcing the laws on the books, and an oil and gas commission appointed by the governor makes the decisions on whether or not these suspensions go forward or hold. So, we're just in this round and round and round circle of, unending problems here. And how loud do you have to cry out? How long do we have to, be under this fear of the effect of these oil and gas wells and disposal wells? So, we're kind of tired in Appalachia of being abused and assaulted just because we're here in Appalachia. I mean, these are where the resources are, and so this is where they dump. It's not fair. And I invite everybody to write to ODNR. Call the governor's office and say, when are you going to pay attention to our area of the state of Ohio? Quit dumping up. We actually have this wonderful saying, and I have a toilet seat I put around my neck, it's a toxic toilet of Ohio that we used to take to demonstrations up in Ohio. And that's what we call us, this, we are the toxic toilet in Ohio, right here in Appalachia. So, I just wanna thank everybody in Washington County who has just done this incredible job. The volunteers, the, Protect Our Water group have just been extraordinary in the efforts that they've put forth. And, I'm getting ready to retire from all this and let Bev take over all of it.
Bev, you said go to the meetings. I got kicked out of the big meeting before any of this started in Pittsburgh.
Oh, really?
I got kicked out of it. Division of Oil and Gas, well, Troy Hefner, not the playboy, but the chief of U.S. Department of Energy called me up. I paid him $20,000 to come out and look at some things I was doing. And he told me to go to Pittsburgh, where we're at, because there's a big meeting up there, and I needed to attend it. So I go. My wife and I went. Dressed suit and tie, like I was a dignitary. Went in, and met people from New York, met people from Pennsylvania. And the Ohio delegation was there. One of the boys from Ohio, the assistant chief, told me, Mr. Anderson, it's time for you to leave. There's nothing here for you. So I kind of hid from him. Another man from the Department of Natural Resources met up with me. He told me, get out. So I did. On the way out, I picked up the schedule that they was going to the agenda and one of the booklets and called up Columbus, maybe 6 weeks later, and asked him how the clean water meeting went. And of course, he knew nothing about it. And I lost my cool, and I told him, you wrote the book on it. And the next time I went to get a permit, I was denied. So those boys in Columbus, maybe you folks get along with them, but I don't.
All right, any questions from reporters for the speakers? Yes.
So I saw just like the different statistics from I presume like as the Division of Oil and Gas Resource Management, but I also saw you guys say that there's a lot of gaps in between some just like the pressure ratings, and I was just wondering what are like just some examples of like the sizable gaps, I guess?
So,
because I see like the different numbers, it goes from like 20 to 310 on one of them, but I was just wondering if there's gaps in between that.
So, the impacted wells that we're talking about today, since 2020, a lot of them just haven't even been monitored. They haven't been visited. And the 3 impacted wells owned by Mr. Wilson, they were not visited from 2021 to 2022. Only 1 inspection in 23, no inspection in 24, 1 in 25. And the frequency has just increased in 2026. That's just one example, but there's no systemic process and that makes sense for them to come out and check this problem. They just recently found that it's growing. Why is it growing? We don't know. ODNR needs to do that thorough investigation to find out why, but that's just one example of the gap. Any other questions?
So the big concern is that this could potentially impact the drinking water, years down the road. So I guess what can be done now to stop this?
Yes, that's actually one of the calls to action that we have listed in the report. So we really want ODNR to, immediately suspend injection operations in the area around Redbird and monitor for changes after the injection has ceased. And not just Redbird, but really the whole county, they need to do that. And that's what the 8 different water authorities and county officials did. Not the county commissioners, by the way, but a lot of other ones. They did that. They asked for a moratorium and they did not get it. They got crickets from Columbus. Columbus is not listening. They're not responding. They didn't even acknowledge that they got the 8 different resolutions that were passed. The city of MARIETTA, they delivered it, and then advocates delivered it again a couple weeks later. Nothing. So they need to immediately suspend injection wells, and launch a long-term systemic investigation into the brine waste migration issue across southeast Ohio. Noble, Athens, Washington, because this is happening in Noble County too, and it already happened in Athens, as Roxanne mentioned, and worked on for years. So they really need to do that massive investigation to see how far is the migration traveling to. They have the, they should have the resources to do this, and they're just not doing it. Apply constant pressure monitoring and reporting standards to every well with the history of migration concerns. So go to every single well, those are some of the wells impacted there, and apply that constant pressure monitoring to see how they're doing over time. And then test private water wells, drinking water wells, within at least 5 miles of an injection well that has had issues with migration. So check for that drinking water contamination. They're also not doing that. They have not done that in a long-term way. And by the way, before I forget, we have Council President Susan Vessels of MARIETTA here. She can do an interview after this is over if anybody would like to talk to her with what the city's done. So, any other reporter questions? Reporters first, sorry.
Yeah, can you, what's the status of Ben's lawsuit against ODNR?
Well, we, the magistrate for the court system that is in, he put out an opinion on it, and his opinion was that it should be dismissed. And so we're waiting for the other courts, the other judges within that court to then make their decision, because it's not just the magistrate's decision. And then we also have Megan Hunter with Earth Justice in the room. I don't know if you want to add to that, Megan, at all. You don't have to, but it's up to you.
Yeah, so I think Bev covered it really well. The magistrate's opinion was issued. That's just an opinion. That is not the opinion of the court. And Buckeye Environmental Network, Earth Justice on their behalf, has objected to that opinion, and that's been briefed. And now we wait for the full court to make a decision.
And we can get you those documents if you want.
Well, that'd be, or, I mean, I can, what court is it in?
What court is it in?
It is in the 10th District of Ohio.
So the magistrate's decision was, you can read Earth Justice's rebuttal to that. I'm not going to comment on it, but yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else? Questions for any of the speakers, any reporters?
I did just have a question that I'll answer to everybody so that everyone can hear it. But I was asked, what was the type of well that they can drill to try to help pull the fluids out, and I call that an interceptor well. There's lots of different ways that you can remediate things, and it would be very expensive. So basically, you would try to figure out where the plume of contamination is going. Now, Marietta's water aquifer was contaminated since the 1960s and 70s by tetrachloroethylene from a dry cleaner that was right by the Quadrino. And so over the years that they were dry cleaning, they were just dumping their toxins into their backyard. So they had drilled a little hole in the ground. And so what they found was that plume of tetrachloroethylene, which is very poisonous and carcinogenic, was going right across from the Quadrino. And since, like I said, fluids flow in the direction of lower pressure, so they were flowing up the Muskingum Valley, through our aquifer, right up towards our pumping wells that are all around the baseball parks. What do they call that? India, what's the name of the park?
Indian Acres.
Indian Acres Park, yeah, that's right. And so they had to sink a bunch of wells between the plume and our producing wells that would put lower pressure at that place so that the plume would go there and then cycle it through and dispose of those fluids over 20 or so years. It was very expensive. Our aquifer is, because of that, a Superfund site. That's who paid for it, the Superfund. And just 10 years ago, some of you guys might recall a dry cleaner on, I think, 3rd Street. They were doing the same thing. And that's basically why they shut down, because people found out that they had drilled a little hole in their backyard right by the beer barn, Rogue Swift, and they were dumping their tetrachloroethylene into that. So very sensitive, and yeah, that would go, be stuck right up. Our pressures that they're pulling those water wells down to they're pulling a lot of water out there. We saw the tanks up by the water facility that has 2 million gallons of water in it, ready to go down to our houses and stuff. But, so I could imagine for this problem, you would have to drill probably dozens, if not hundreds of wells. How much does it cost to drill a well at the Berea?
Probably $150,000.
$150,000, multiply that by 50.
And what do you do with the water when you pull it out?
Circulate that area, you'd have to perf in all of those zones, the Maxburg, the Berea. You would have to put a compressor on the top of that. You would have to put tanks next to it or pipelines that would take that fluid someplace. So it's expensive. That would be tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. That's your solution to this. Interceptor wells around it, pumped real hard until the problem's gone, which could be 50 years, 60 years.
They're down 10 will stop and bring a brine down here.
Yeah. And then where do you put that brine?
That's it.
All right, so with respect to the reporters that are here, I think we're gonna cap the questions there. If anyone else has any questions, please find the person to ask your question after this meeting. We are gonna wrap it up. I listed out the calls for action from us. Just a couple more logistical things. Actually, I wanna read one more statement before that. So elected officials representing this area at the state level have not adequately addressed this issue, save Rep. Rader and a couple others, but Senator Brian Chavez is the subject of an ethics complaint filed with the state earlier this year by members of Washington County for safe drinking water. The 20-plus page complaint outlined familial ties that Chavez has to the company disposing of waste near Marietta's aquifer, and for sponsoring and fast-tracking legislation that would aid the injection well industry as the chairman of the Energy Committee in the Senate. Chavez is now the chairman of the Data Center Committee that recently formed in the Senate. Many people are questioning his ability to ethically lead this committee that is supposed to weigh the pros and cons of data center expansion in the state due to his ties to the oil and gas industry. And as I said, on the House side, we have Rep. Rader, who has not been doing enough either. We have people in the room that met with him, including myself, and he is basically passing the buck to ODNR. ODNR passes the buck back to the House and Senate, and back and forth they go. So we are calling on our lawmakers to, do more, and we don't have that much, many people looking after this situation. That's why we're having a press conference. That's why we want to get more headlines. And if we have a dozen reporters calling ODNR, and asking for quotes, that's important. That builds the narrative here. So, if you do call ODNR and you're asking for, their response to all of this, and they do tell you they're taking action on the injection wells around here, and if they do tell you they're shutting them down, we don't know what they're doing. They could be doing that because clearly they know something's going on. They're checking the pressures. If they tell you that, it was because of the people in this room. It was because of us, the producers making noise, the reporters reporting on it. That's why changes are happening. If they are, as I said, we don't know what they're doing. But I just want you guys to know that as you're reporting on this issue. It's not because they're doing their due diligence quick enough. All right, so logistics. So we are going to leave some time for refreshments, and I think maybe let's try to start our field trip around 2 p.m. I think that would leave enough time for us to fuel ourselves. And so at 2 o'clock, let's anybody who wants to go on a field trip, let's meet in the parking lot right outside here, and I can tell you the logistics of where we're going to go. And we have like a little route planned. I can show you this map of where we're going to go, but I highly encourage anyone that wants to do that to join, because we're going to go to a new well that we haven't been to before, that we haven't showed reporters yet. A new well that is one of Bob's, and a couple of injection wells. So I guess we can wrap it up there, and we'll see you outside at 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.